So this PowerPoint's going to continue on with our discussions earlier in class about the Europeans' explorations. Primarily, we talked about Portugal and their explorations around the Indian Ocean, and then European interaction with both China and Japan. At the same time that this is going on, around 1492, someone sails from Spain all the way to the Americas, and this age of exploration continues in this new world that's going to become kind of a race to conquer this huge new territory that's explored by the Europeans. So with the success of these Portuguese, like we were talking about before, other European countries wanted to join in the gaining of this wealth. Okay, so Christopher Columbus, who was a Genoese sea captain, made a daring voyage towards the East Indies, all right? But instead of sailing south around Africa to Asia, he thought he could reach the Spice Islands by sailing west. Thereby, he could cut out a lot of the travel time and save money, and then come back with the same amount of spices and goods. However, that event would bring together the peoples of Europe, Africa, and the Americas, and Asia, in kind of the first years of globalization. This is the first time that the entire world was in contact with each other. So anyway, the voyages of Columbus himself. Columbus got his money from Spain's monarchs Ferdinand and Isabella. No one in Italy would support him, but the Spanish crown was willing to give him some money and some ships in order to go across the seas. So he sailed with 3 ships going west across the Atlantic Ocean, the Nina, the Pinta, and the Santa Maria. And he arrived in San Salvador on October 12th, 1492. Before they found the islands, there was a near mutiny aboard his ships where the sailors themselves were telling Columbus that we're sailing towards our death. We need to turn the ships around. But he persevered, and they made it to San Salvador, which is today Hispaniola, the island of Haiti and the Dominican Republic. Anyway, he lands in the the West Indies, and he mistakenly calls the inhabitants Los Indios because he thought he had actually landed in India. So to this day, we still call Native Americans Indians, which is a completely wrong nomenclature for the people that lived there. Anyway, Columbus is interested purely in gold and land possessions. He was a pretty selfish man. We're going to read more about this later on. When he returned to Spain, people were really enthralled with his tale, and they funded 3 more journeys, and he became an empire builder. All right, and he made Spain very, very wealthy. So the idea is, when you were growing up, I'm sure you heard that Columbus was a great man. In 1492, he sailed the ocean blue. He brought the worlds together. He made all these great things for Europeans. But what actually happened to the Native Americans? While we're in class, next class period, we will be discussing this in more detail. So you do not need to read this newspaper article. We will be doing so in class, next class period. Anyway, so we'll move on. We'll talk more about Columbus in class. Other explorers that are important to know is Pedro Alvarez Cabral. He sails for Portugal, and he claims Brazil in 1500. In 1501, Amerigo Vespucci sails. He's an Italian, but also sailing for the Spanish. He claimed that this was not part of Asia, but actually a new world. So in 1507, a German mapmaker actually named this new continent America in honor of Vespucci, and so that's why you have these 2 huge continents that are known as America today. The Spanish explorer Vasco Balboa, he would actually cross the Isthmus of Panama and viewed the Pacific Ocean, confirming what Amerigo Vespucci had said earlier, that this was a new world. If anybody's ever been to Panama, Balboa is a very popular name and a very popular person, which is kind of interesting. In 1519, the Portuguese explorer Ferdinand Magellan, he actually circumnavigated the world. He had 250 men on 5 different ships, and he sailed all the way from from Portugal, across the Atlantic Ocean, down around the southern tip of South America, all the way across the Pacific Ocean to the Philippines, where he actually was killed in a local struggle, civil war going on there. But his crew carried on back to Spain, and only 18 men and 1 ship returned out of the 250 and 5 ships that left. So here you can see kind of the Spanish explorers is represented in purple, and we'll notice later that Spain did control a lot of this territory. While England and France was more concerned with North America, and the Portuguese were really limited. They were still more concentrated on the Indian Ocean and Africa. Anyway, the Spanish in America, after Columbus, Spain had taken a great interest in this new world, and as you saw in that last map, they sent a lot more explorers to go check it out. Spain had colonized several Caribbean islands, and then it turns to the American mainland. And this is when they unleashed the conquistadors, which means conquerors in Spanish, that searched the Americas looking for gold and wealth. That's what they really wanted, was gold. They thought there was going to be tons and tons of gold throughout the Americas. The results of the conquistadors and their victories made Spain a very wealthy country in the centuries to come. Two conquistadors that you definitely need to know are Hernan Cortez, and the next one will be Francisco Pizarro. Cortez landed in Mexico in 1519. He learned of this very wealthy civilization of the Aztecs, and his small force was able to reach Tenochtitlan after a couple weeks, and the Montezuma, who was the emperor of the Aztecs, thought that Cortez was a god and gave the Spanish some gold. The Spanish weren't satisfied with this, and eventually the Aztecs drove the Spanish out, but then the Spanish returned and conquered the Aztecs in 1521. There was a lot of blood and gore that came along with this, and we'll talk more about this in class as well. Then in 1532, Francisco Pizarro went to the Incan capital in Peru, and with only an army of about 200 men, was able to kidnap the Incan ruler by fooling him at Atahualpa, and then eventually the Incas paid lots of gold and silver in order to get their leader back, and the Spanish killed the Incan king anyway, and Pizarro captured the Incan capital, Cusco, from the demoralized Incans. Now, there are several reasons for the success of the conquistadors. It wasn't just that they were militarily stronger, but there was other things going on as well. One thing, they definitely did have superior weaponry, guns and cannons versus bows and arrows. Just think about the consequences of that face-off. In addition to that, they enlisted smaller native groups to help conquer the bigger groups. The Aztecs and the Incas had kind of conquered lots of territory and abused the smaller tribes around, and so they were able to ally with those smaller tribes to gain more followers and to take down the big dogs of the Aztecs and the Incas. And then probably the most devastating thing of all was diseases, measles, mumps, and smallpox that decimated the Indian populations, as you can see in this image on the right-hand side. That smallpox was a devastating disease to a lot of the Native Americans. Now, Spain's pattern of conquest, they took over the entire continent and a half of Central, South America, Mexico. They had control of most of North America for a while. But one way they did this was they tried to breed out the natives. So most peninsulares, these were people who settled, were men, and they had relationships with native women. And what was the result was mestizos, so it's this mixed Spanish and Native American ancestry. They also oppressed native peoples with something called the encomienda system. And this is where a system where natives farmed, ranched, or mined for Spanish landlords. The landlords received rights to the natives' labor from Spanish authorities, and pretty much they worked laborers to death, and often, though they promised to treat them well. And especially in the mines, the silver mines and the gold mines were especially dangerous.